name is Robin Pearson. I am chair of the diversity section for the Contra Costa County Bar Association, and we are very pleased to put this program on. As you can see, we have an incredible panel and a lot of information for you. So I am not going to talk too much. Just want to remind you guys of a few things. Please make sure you pick up the pamphlets if you haven't in the back. Stay afterwards. You'll have an opportunity to talk with the judges and Kimberly here from Jenny, which I think will be invaluable to you. There's a save the date day I'd like you all to keep in mind. We're going to try and do part 2 of this panel where we have more in-depth review of applications, discussions with other Jenny commissioners and current sitting judges to help you along with the process. The date we're looking at now is February 18th, 2016, and we will have more information on that as we get closer to that date. So now it's my distinct privilege to introduce our moderator of this panel, the Honorable Judge Dinah Becton. And as I was going through this amazing resume CV of hers, which is a full 2 pages long and probably could be a lot longer, it was kind of hard to pick and choose what to pull out of here. But I think you'd be interested to know a little bit about her background because she really is quite a remarkable lady. As you know, she's a Superior Court judge here in Contra Costa County, currently assigned to Felony Trial Department. She was the presiding judge in 2011 and appointed to the bench in 1995. She's a native Californian, grew up in Oakland, attended Oakland Public Schools, graduated from Castlemont High School, and this year she earned a Master's of Theological Studies at Pacific School of Religion in Berkeley. She got her BA from San Francisco State. She went to law school at night with her 2 young sons at home, graduating from Golden Gate University School of Law in 1985. And she doesn't look old enough to have graduated from law school in 85, honestly. I would have said at least 95, maybe. She has been, she is currently on the State Bar Council Access and Fairness and is our chair of the Judiciary Committee and doing a fantastic job. She was appointed by the Chief Justice to the Judicial Council Advisory Committee on Civil Jury Instructions in 2007, and the list goes on and on. Her honors take up a complete page alone, so I'll just highlight a couple that are significant. She won the California Women Lawyers Rose Bird Memorial Award in 2012, which is awarded to a person who is elevated for excellence as a jurist, long-standing public service, and inspiration to women lawyers in California. And that is so true. I can't even go into all of them. There's so many. I'll say this. She's a member of the National Association of Women Judges, and she's the 2015 president-elect. As if she doesn't have enough to do, she is going to be next year the president of all the women judges in the United States, and I just think that's amazing. She has 2 adult sons who have turned out incredibly well. She, in her spare time, and I have no idea when that is, she enjoys travel, golf, cooking, reading, and is a student in martial arts. So please help me welcome Judge Dinah Becton.
Okay, and Robin, thank you so much for that warm and incredible welcome. I appreciate it, and I am so happy to see all of you here. As Robin mentioned, we at COAF, the Council of Access and Fairness, are going up and down the state to put on these workshops to basically demystify the whole process about applying. And I just wanted to lift up one other thing about the upcoming workshop that we'll bring back in February the 18th, and that is that for those of you who are far enough along to have actually completed a draft of your application by then, we actually have former Jenny commissioners, those who've recently served with us, and they actually give you time one-on-one to review your application and give you feedback. So for those of you who are actually at that stage, it is an incredible opportunity, and I ask you to please take note of that date and tried to be here. So both jury commissioners and sitting judges will be taking a look at your applications. But let me, since Robin was so generous with her introduction, I'll take a liberty with her as well, because Robin, for those of you who do not know, is a very experienced trial lawyer here in Contra Costa County, and she's litigating cases involving a broad range of commercial matters. She's authored articles on real estate, employment, and insurance issues. She has served as president of the Contra Costa County Bar Association. She was the 5th woman to serve this association and the first woman of color. And also she was chair of the Bar's Diversity Committee. I want to thank Robin for the service that she gives to this important issue, particularly her attempts to increase diversity in the bench and in the bar. She is currently our vice chair for co-op, and she will be coming in next year as our president. So we're grateful to have her here. Let me introduce our panelists, and I'm going to start immediately to my right. We are also very fortunate to have with us Judge Marguerite Downing, who flew in today from Los Angeles County. Judge Downing is actually the chair of the State Bar Council of Access and Fairness. She currently sits in and presides over dependency cases. She chairs a group entitled the Incarcerated Parents Working Group for Los Angeles County, and it is one of the first groups that supported efforts increasing issues affecting parents and the effect that incarceration has on dependent children in the child welfare system. I've mentioned that she's current chair of co-op, but prior to her appointment to the bench, she worked as a public defender for over 18 years in the Los Angeles County Office of the Public Defender. She has a tremendous PowerPoint that she's going to share with you this afternoon. She's also previously served as an officer of the National Bar Association and a member of the committee for the ABA Judicial Division. So please join me in welcoming Judge Downing to us. Then I'm going to skip all the way over because I want to also welcome Ms. Kimberly Knill. And we're so fortunate to have Ms. Knill with us. Ms. Knill is currently serving as the chair of the Judicial Nominations Evaluation Committee. And she's flown in from Orange County, so we are really grateful to have her with us today. She, in terms of her employment, serves with the Orange County Superior Court as a legal research attorney. And she also has a specialization as a certified appellate specialist, certified by the State Bar. She serves in some volunteer activities as well, including the Laguna Beach Unified School District site and the PTA, as well as the High School Scholarship Foundation trustee and a past vice president. So please welcome Ms. Kimberly. And almost last, I want to welcome to our panel as well Judge Anita Santos. And Judge Santos is one of the newest members of the Contra Costa County Superior Court bench, which is why we're grateful to have her here, because we'd like to have on our panel a person who has recently been appointed under the current administration so that they can share their story and their path and their experience with their appointment. She's been on the bench for just a year, and as she says, and counting. She is actually has such an interesting and diverse background. She actually attended community college in Solano before she went on to Cal and then to Hastings. She worked as a police dispatcher. She worked as a police officer here in the city of Concord. and then she served in the Contra Costa County District Attorney's Office for 11 years before going into private practice as a solo practitioner for 4 years. And she's the proud mother of 4 children. She has 2 dogs. I was going to tell you, I'm so fascinated by her origins. She was actually born in the Philippines. I'll just highlight a couple of these things. And she was raised in Japan. So on the break, you might want to ask her some questions about all of these things. But she's Cape Verdean on her paternal side, which is a group of African islands off the west coast of Africa that were colonized by the Portuguese until the late 1800s. And so her grandparents actually immigrated from the old country by sneaking over in a whaling boat and settled in Cape Cod, Massachusetts, near Boston. And so she has a really rich, interesting story to share with you so that you can talk to her. And then last but not least, although not seated here at the table, I do want to recognize Judge John Cope. He was also going to be on our panel this evening. I've known Judge Cope from when he was in the District Attorney's Office. I am so proud to say that he served when I served in the Felony Calendar Department, that he was my calendar deputy. That person has to keep that courtroom moving, but in a calm and organized way, and he did that every single day. He brings those same skills to our bench, and we're really pleased to have him as a recent appointee as well. Unfortunately, Judge Cope lost his aunt and had to travel just in the last day to be with his family and to attend the services, so he couldn't be here, but we want to hold a special place for him at the table. So with that, we are going to turn our attention to Judge Marguerite Downey, but let me mention one other thing. I want to make sure everyone has a packet because it's full of really valuable information for you. In addition to the PowerPoint presentations that you'll hear tonight from Judge Downey and Ms. Knill, the entire presentation is in your packet, so if they don't go over every single slide, you will have the slides in your packet. We also have a document entitled Navigating Judicial Appointments Under the Brown Administration. So it gives you some really good tips about what to look for there, as well as an actual application that you would be required to complete. There's another document entitled Resource Materials for the application. And so if you have any questions about the documents, feel free to ask us as well. But I want to turn right over to our speakers, and we'll start with Judge Downey.
All right, well, good evening, and it's a pleasure to be here on behalf of the Council on Access and Fairness. And I do have to give a commercial. When you get your bar dues and there's that $5 checkoff, this is what that $5 checkoff pays for. None of the mandatory dues that you pay for your state bar membership are used for any of our programs, but now you see where that $5 goes. So let me start by talking about, we are here to inspire and talk about strategies for achieving diversity in the judiciary. And part of the reason we do that is because the State Bar's mission is public protection. And diversity in the bench is one of those items that have been long recognized as a key strategy to ensuring that those that need access to the courts have it. They also ensure that litigants who come to court feel that they have had the opportunity to be heard. And so one of the focuses we do is on co-op is we serve as the State Bar's think tank about diversity issues. And our job is not just to do these trainings, but is also to ensure that programs that the State Bar does includes the issue of diversity, and that the committees and the sections on the State Bar are diverse in terms of gender, sexual preferences, ethnic diversity, area practices, geographical areas. And so the case for diversity, one, administration of justice. Litigants who come to court, even if they don't get the result they want, they feel that when the bench looks like them, understands them, then they've had their day in court, even if they don't get the result they're looking for. You need to keep in mind that California is going to be by 2041, is going to be a state of minorities. And so it is incumbent upon us to ensure that the bench looks at the population, because it's the litigants that come to court that determine what comes to court, and it's their cases, not the courts. It also gives the appearance of fairness. As I mentioned, we have an aging population. Our population in California is going to become more diverse ethnically and racially, and so it's incumbent upon us to diversify the bench. As Judge Becton mentioned, my presentation is in the program, and there are 47 slides, so I'm not going to go through all of them because I do want Ms. Knill to be able to give you all the tips about what happens when you get through Jenny, and to also give you an opportunity to ask questions. I'm not going to go through all of them, but you have the opportunity in your leisure time when you're done the 73-page judicial application to review these presentations. So diversity is important. So let's look at the numbers. There are 1,655 sitting judges. 69.9% of them are Caucasian. 6.2% of them are Asian Pacific Islander. 6.5 are African American, 0.5 are Native American, and 9.4 are Hispanic or Latino. 3.5% are mixed. In the district court, there are 98 sitting judges, and in the year ending 2014, 75% of them were non-minority, they were Caucasian. In the Superior Court, almost 70%, 69.9% are Caucasian. And you will see the pie chart behind me. Here is what the population looks at in comparative to the judges. You will see, and in the San Francisco area, the Bay Area, you will note that in places like Alameda, San Mateo, San Francisco, the bench hovers around 15 to 20%, but the population has a minority percentage of 60%. So we have a long way to go. Sonoma, 6.5%, but they have a population of 36.3%. And in the Central Valley, it's even worse. Madero, Kern, Sacramento is actually doing a lot better than other places, but you have Tulare and Stanislaus, and Fresno County, which I was just there last week speaking. There is a lack of diversity on the bench, and diversity is not just ethnic, it's also women on the bench. Women make up 54% of the students in law school, but they don't make up 54% of the lawyers practicing in the state of California or the judicial officers. Here is Southern California. I have to say, LA prides himself. They're not the best, but they're getting closer, and they're more than halfway there. So I have to give them a shout out. Here is gender. There are of the judicial officers, there are only 32.2% of them all over in all California courts are women, but they're 54% in law school. So at some point we're losing our women. And I can understand that women balance a lot of issues. Family is one of them, and they seem to get off the partner track, or they come out of practice to raise children, and then it's a harder lesson to get back into track. What's interesting is before, we had a judicial summit in 2005, and at that time, that was the first time that the state really talked to the legislator, talked to the governor's appointment, and talked as a state about judicial appointments. And one of the things we discovered is we couldn't tell how we were doing because we didn't take statistics. We had no way of knowing how many women applied for the bench, therefore we could tell how many of them were getting appointed. We had no statistics on ethnic or racial minorities who were applying. And so as a result of our summit and our relationship with the then Speaker of the Assembly, we were able to get the California legislature to start looking at the numbers so that we could track how well we're doing. And it's only recently now that we're starting to look at sexuality as well as veteran status and disability. Heretofore, those numbers were also not counted and not collected. You will notice on this set that one of the challenges we have is we ask the question, but nobody responds. So as a change, as a result of the Judicial Summit, there was a change in the government code that required, it was a voluntary collection, but it required the government to start, the governor's office to start taking stats and asking for stats so that we could track our progress and see how we're doing. One of the challenges we have and one of the things we continue to work on is, as you will note, there is a pipeline. You apply to the bench and then there's a process. There is the secret committee that, depending on who you talk to, it's either secret or it's not secret. And one of the challenges co-op has had is we really don't know who makes those decisions, the secret committee. Their names aren't published. We have no way of knowing if you know them, how you know them, who do they know. Additionally, we don't know about their makeup. We don't know if they're ethnically diverse. We don't know if they're gender diverse. And all the other things we look at to make a truly diverse board, we have no way of knowing. One of the other things that co-op does is we do training for Jenny. Every year co-op does a presentation to Jenny because we want them to understand how critical it is when they are looking at judicial applicants, that diversity is something they need to take into consideration. The governor wants the best and the brightest, and I think that's what Jenny strives to do. But some of the things that make us the best and brightest are also who we are and what we bring to the bench. And that a lot of times has to do with where we come from, who we are.
And whether you golf.
I'm sorry?
And whether you golf.
That can have a different, that can. They talk about Wednesday. I've never taken a Wednesday off, but Judge Becton over here has been...
Not off on Wednesdays.
No, let me clear it up. It's just Saturday mornings, but we've lost her a couple of times to meetings because on a weekend.
George Duke Major Methodist. Who do you golf with?
Well, but you have to keep in mind that under his administration, women and minorities weren't getting appointed, so it's a completely different day.
Because we don't golf.
And that too. And so we're working on that. But one of the things, as I mentioned, the informal committee, we have no way of knowing. And we don't do any training. All right, that's different than Jenny. We have a working relationship with Jenny, and we've had that for a couple of years. You know who Jenny is. They're available to you, and as we put on these programs, Jenny is always more than willing to come and sit and talk about the process and ensure to the best of their ability it's an open discussion about the process, so it won't be secret, so you know what's going on. And one of the things I'm sure Judge Santos will tell you is there's a lot of discussion when we do these presentations about the Jenny process and how Jenny is a scary process. I have to tell you that when I went through the process, my two Jenny commissioners were wonderful. And they told me, we're on your team. We're here to make you look as good as you can look. We're here to help you answer all the questions. So it's really a team effort. So I know that a lot of people think that Jenny is a scary thing, but it's really not. They're there really to help you and make you look as good as you can on your to get there to the governor. So it's not something that clearly should be feared. Additionally, you have local bar associations, minority bar associations, and local bar associations such as this, who also qualify the qualified. They write letters of evaluations, they do programs like this to ensure that those qualified do in fact and are inspired to apply. All right, so let's talk about the Jenny ratings by diversity. You will see that EWQ, which is exceptionally well qualified, in 2012, so that you understand the numbers, there was one API. In 2013, there were 3, and in 2014, there were 2. And Ms. Knill will talk to you about how those numbers mean in terms of getting to the governor and what makes the difference between an EWQ and a WQ, and what happens if you're found to be not qualified. Here are the ratings for women. It's interesting, the numbers of women seem to be fairly consistent. They're all in the 60s. And that is one of the reasons more women need to apply in order to get appointed. And here is how the governor has been doing. 66.7% of his appointments have been white or Caucasian. 2.7 is the low end or other and unknown. I'm not really sure what an unknown is, but I guess no one answered the question, so that's why they're unknown. All right, he's been consistent. These are his numbers in 2013, and here's his numbers in 2014. California is special for a lot of reasons, but one of the things that California is really special is that our Supreme Court in California is a majority female bench. It is also a majority minority bench as well, which is unknown across the country. But there's still a lot that we can do, and this is one of the reasons that we do what we do in terms of co-op, because it's our concern that we self-select women and lawyers from diverse backgrounds. We self-select ourselves out, and we're always thinking that at some point we'll apply. Maybe I'm not as qualified as I think. Maybe I need to do this a little longer. And our goal here is to tell you, you need to just fill out the application and take the leap, because you can't get appointed unless you apply. So now, as part of the government code, the Ginny Fairness and Bias Training that we've mentioned, co-op does it annually for Ginny as part of our mission and our work. So they receive an additional hour of training every year that they serve on the term. We've also been working with the governor because back in the day when I was appointed, I was the first woman that came out of the PD's office in 25 years that went from the PD's office to the bench. Back in the day when I was appointed, you had to be a prosecutor to be appointed. And you will see that under Governor Schwarzenegger, some of those things changed. Prosecutors made up 39%, civil made up 32%, PD and defense lawyers made up 4%, and for the first time, law professors, mediators, in-house were 4%. You look now at Governor Brown's appointment, prosecutors are now 21%. Judicial officers went from 2% to now 22%. And Governor Brown seems to elevate commissioners. But you also see that public defenders and defense attorneys have gone up, and in-house mediators, law professors, that's gone up substantially. It went from 4% to 14%. As I mentioned, and I apparently had the wrong year, our first judicial summit was in 2006, and we hold one every 5 years. And some of the things that we learned from that, as I mentioned, it was the first statewide conference on appointments. We started to look at the application process. When I applied, it wasn't online. It was a paper document. And when we first started this, it was online, but you couldn't save it. You couldn't change it. You could sit there for 3 hours and fill it out, and then you had to print it. There was nowhere to proof it. And so we worked very hard with the governor, and the governor has understood the challenge that you do want to put your best foot forward, and at 3 in the morning your spelling might get a little fuzzy, so you really do need the opportunity to correct it. We've also worked on ensuring that local selection committees that are established by the bar associations are engaged in this process. And we've worked to ensure that the growing disparity between the state's population and the bench are decreased. We've also worked with the governor's office to obtain comprehensive and consistent demographic information from law schools, from the AOC, from the state bar, from Jenny, the governor's office, and the private sector, so we could see who's being appointed and what we can do. We've also worked to increase the recruitment and appointments of judicial applicants with disabilities and those from the lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender communities. We've increased slightly the number of ethnic minorities and women that are on the bench, and the governors have appointed judges from more diverse backgrounds. There has been legislation mandating annual statistical data collection. There was the first transgender judge elected in Alameda. And we now do implicit bias training for Jenny commissioners. That's all since the 2006 Judicial Summit. And as I mentioned, there were changes. And then there's just a number of additional ones. All right, we got to the 2011. We've made progress. We worked on improving that judicial application. We've worked on the current status of diversity. We've also started what we call this as our roadshow. And we also started, as Ms. Pearson and Judge Becton have indicated, the second part of this training is really an opportunity for you to go over with the judicial officer or a former Jenny commissioner your own application with them line by line, so that they can give you suggestions, so that they can give you tips. And you really need to have somebody look at your application. I know it's a very personal experience, but as the governor's appointment secretary says all the time to us, the governor prides himself that he has never appointed a judicial officer with a typo in their application. So it's incumbent on you to make sure that you put your best foot forward. So working through the 2011 recommendations, we are now working on trying to stop the leaky pipeline. There are a lot of people that think about applying, but they never fill out that application, and then once they fill out the application, they don't get through the entire process. So we're trying to provide you at this meeting with tools to help you get through the process once you've completed that application. This is just more information about some of the things we've done, and you can read them at your leisure. And then in 2016, as Judge Becton indicated, we are going to have the Judicial Summit. It is going to be part of the State Bar annual meeting in San Diego next September and October of 2016. We are still working to fill existing judicial vacancies. We are also working with the legislature because there are at least 150 judicial appointments that have been mandated by legislation but haven't been funded. We're also trying to increase diversity of our applicant pool, and we're trying, as this is one, helping to mentor applications through the process. We're trying to ensure that training is being given to everybody who is a part of the application process, and we're trying to ensure that there is transparency with respect to the process and the numbers and those that are getting to the bench and those that are applying to the bench. Clearly, we need a bigger pool so that more candidates, qualified candidates, can be appointed. We're here to recruit and encourage you. If you're thinking about doing it, as I keep telling you, you won't get appointed unless you apply. And one of the other issues is to push for a better retirement system to attract. And I realize in this day and age, there's a thought that really, judges make pretty good salary. But here's one of the things. In LA, there are lawyers that make $1,000 an hour. You're not going to convince them. You're not going to convince them to leave their practice to get on the bench. But if you want the best and brightest, you have to ensure to folks that are making really good money in private practice, it's worth their while to become a public servant. And so one of the ways you do that is you ensure them a good judicial retirement. So we're going to continue to do what we do, and these you can all look at your leisure, so I can turn this over to Ms. Knill, who can give you all these incredible tips. And I believe at the end of this slide, there is Judge Becton's email, because she chairs now the Judicial Committee. Whoa. There she is. Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry.
Not the doors.
Yeah, she's not the doors. And then, so all the presentation is in the packet, and so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ms.
I'm Kimberly, and thank you, Judge Becton, and to my fellow panel members for having me here tonight, and the Contra Costa County Bar Association. It's my pleasure to be here on behalf of the Jenny Commission, and hopefully I can give you some idea about what it's like either serving on the Jenny Commission. Maybe some of you would want to do that someday. That's also something I can tell you about. But also, putting your application into the governor and wondering, if you get to Jenny, what it's going to mean for you. So, let's see, do I have this? The presentation is designed just to give you a general overview of what we do with the Jenny Commission, and I'll just talk about things that come to mind, but feel free to answer or to ask any questions, because Jenny is really only one very small piece of the process that is involved in applying to become a judge and then ultimately being appointed. The governor, when he is considering an appointment, is required to send the applicant, or we call the candidate, to the Jenny Commission. That's for the trial court, appellate court, and Supreme Court. Have the privilege of being on the commission for our last two Supreme Court nominees, and it really is quite exciting. We've also had several courts of appeal justices appointed, and obviously, many trial court judges. But unless you're planning on running for election, this is your path, is to go through the governor, and he cannot appoint until the Jenny Commission has investigated you. So the Jenny Commission is run by the State Bar of California. Our mission is to assist the governor in the judicial selection process, and to provide an independent, comprehensive, accurate, and fair evaluation of the candidate for the governor's use in determining who he wants to appoint. I always want to mention this because confidentiality is really the core of everything that we do. I'm sure everyone in the room has received probably multiple confidential comment forms, those forms that Jenny Commissioners send out on candidates who are being investigated. Let me just make a pitch. Please, if you receive one of those and you know the candidate, please weigh in, good, bad, or ugly. That's how we get our information primarily. And but you'll see on there, and it's definitely true when we investigate, that the process is confidential. And we can't even disclose, if one of you were to walk into me tonight and say, oh, I heard so-and-so has their application in, they're going to Jenny, I couldn't confirm or deny that to you. So we really do take this very seriously. We take it seriously for the candidate. We also take it seriously for the raters, those of you who are filling out those forms and turning them back in, so that in the event you do have something you want to add about a candidate's suitability for the bench, please feel free to share that with the commissioner that sent you the form, and we will hold whatever you say to us in confidence. The candidate will never find out about it, and the commission as a whole will never be given your name if that is your wish. So that is how we guide ourselves.
They check state bar complaints.
Absolutely. We are the state bar.
I was wondering if it's all about the person, and then if you're an attorney who's filed a complaint against another attorney, would that ever come up or not? Did they ever send you the questionnaire?
However, let me just say, we will know all of your state bar complaints, if you have any. But I would highly suggest, if you're going to submit your application, calling the state bar and asking for your own record, because there may be something you forgot about, maybe it slipped through the cracks, maybe it never amounted to anything, the investigation was closed, but it's out there and it's lingering. And if you answer the question, have you ever had a state bar complaint? No. We're going to know if the answer is yes. You don't want that.
I have practice professional responsibilities, so my question is this: so if there were, I know that not all complaints go, the attorney is not always informed of that complaint. So you're saying that they should know even the complaints that don't actually get formally
I would suggest it.
Okay.
I think the biggest problem that we face as a commission is when people have failed to disclose something. It could be this or something else. I've heard Mr. Groban say, Mr. Groban is Governor Brown's Permanent Secretary, that almost any horrible can be overcome. But the failure to disclose it can rarely be overcome if the Jenny Commissioner uncovers it. Because remember, we're vetting you for things, among other things, that might embarrass the governor. So if we find something and then you didn't disclose it, it could be because you didn't want to disclose it because you thought it would embarrass you. That would be even more embarrassing for the governor. So I would disclose, and then don't worry about how horrible it is. We'll work you through that. The commission consists of 27 to 38 members. We're usually on the high side. Right now, I think we're at about 37. Most of us are attorneys, but we're required to have public members, and they're usually folks that are somehow connected with the judiciary or interested in it. Sometimes people from HR, from bar associations, stuff like that. The commission appointment is a 3-year appointment. In general, most of the time it's a 3-year appointment. So the commission turns over by approximately 1/3 of its members every year. And the appointments are by the board of trustees of the state bar. Their applications are usually taken right around the beginning of the year, and it opens up, and maybe the deadline is somewhere around May. Don't quote me exactly. June. Okay. So if you're interested in serving as a Jenny Commissioner, either if you're an attorney or if you know a public member who might want to, that's also something you should consider. We also have several judges, ex-judges actually, they have to be former judges or justices on the Jenny Commission. And the state bar is always mindful of the diversity of membership, to the point where they look very carefully at the 1/3 of the commission that is outgoing. And when they appoint the new 1/3 incoming, they take a look at the commission as a whole to make sure it still represents diversity to the best, their ability with the applicants that they have. So the qualities that are evaluated by the Jenny Commission, I just listed some of them. This is, I believe, from the government code. There also, did we have a CCF in here? I guess maybe that didn't get in here. Okay. Well, I can, if you'd like a blank copy of a confidential comment form, feel free to email me, and I can get that for you. But these are the things we look at. I want to focus on the one that most Jenny Commissioners find the most important, and that is judicial temperament, or judicial demeanor. If we're getting comments back from folks that was sort of a hothead or lose your temper during depositions or in court, God forbid, that's going to concern people. But let me tell you something that's not going to concern us, and that is that you have a narrow practice area. The governor has been very open and willing to appoint people with even narrow practice areas. And that is because we are required to consider legal experience broadly. And legal experience broadly means that, well, the way I look at it is, if whatever area you've practiced in, you're good at it, you've done it for a long time, you've mastered it, you're well known in that area, it's not going to hurt you that you're not good at and have not mastered and are not well known in another area. If you're really good at probate, it's not going to matter that you have an independency. If you're really good at civil litigation, it's not going to matter that you've never been a DA or a PD. So we're getting away from, really requiring people in order to get a high rating to have a very broad practice area. If you do have a broad practice area, because we do see candidates that have done almost every area of the law at some point in their career, they're probably going to get a pretty high rating because they're going to be able to take the bench in almost any area and hit the ground running. But it is not required, so don't feel like if all you've ever done is one thing, in your legal career that somehow you're not qualified for the bench. Having said that, some folks will come in and assume that if they've practiced criminal law their entire career, they'll get the criminal, and they're appointed to the bench, then they'll get criminal assignment. Don't make the mistake of assuming that in your Jenny interview, or at all, I would imagine, because I think the judges here can attest to being appointed and then being assigned to places perhaps where they had never practiced before. So one of the things we evaluate during the investigation process is other times in your career or in your life when you had to get up to speed quickly in an area. What have you done? How good are you at that? And we might ask you for an example of that, and just to see, how are you going to cope if you're placed into a courtroom that you've never been in before or practiced in before. The same goes for trial skills. Yeah, it's great if you're a trial attorney, but do you have to be a trial attorney to be appointed to the bench? No, you don't, and that's because the governor and the code requires us to consider legal experience broadly. The code also does break down a few other specific qualities that we evaluate. I'll just touch on the superior court ones: decisiveness, oral communication skills, and patience. I think the patience kind of dovetails with the judicial demeanor. Absolutely. If you get impatient, you're probably going to have a temperament problem. And that's probably not going to be the best quality we're looking for. Attorneys can apply directly to the Court of Appeal or to the Supreme Court. We don't see this often. It's usually sitting trial judges that apply to the Court of Appeal justices. But just so you know, on the governor's website, there are two separate applications for the Court of Appeal. One is for a sitting judge and one is for attorneys that are practicing. So just food for thought there. So the purpose of the commission is to, in the end, rate a candidate, each candidate. So we are on a 90-day reporting cycle. That means the governor, every 90 days, sends us a list of, actually it's shorter than 90 days, sends us a list of candidates that he is requesting us to investigate. So after you submit your judicial application to the governor's office, it sits there unless and until he wants Jenny to investigate. We have no control or power over how quickly or not we get your application. That's out of our hands. That's in his hands, 100%. But he does send us a pretty steady diet so that we usually have something to do. We meet every 60 days between either in San Francisco or Los Angeles. And in between those meeting periods are the times that we're doing our investigations. And after the investigation is complete, the investigation includes an interview, by the way. At the very end, you will be interviewed by the commissioners who are doing your investigation. There are usually 2 commissioners on every trial court investigation, a minimum of 3, often more on every appellate court investigation. There could be more on the trial court, but there usually is only 2. And after the interview, but before the meeting, your investigators will write a written report, it's a draft, and bring it with them to the meeting. And when we meet as a commission, all 30, some of us, sit in the room together and we have an agenda and we go through each candidate one at a time. So your commissioners will, when your name is called, have the opportunity to make a presentation to the commission as a whole about you and about the investigation that those commissioners did on you. Those commissioners will also recommend to the commission as a whole what they believe your rating should be. And so we have 4 different possibilities: exceptionally well qualified, qualified, or not qualified. After the recommendation to the commission as a whole has been made, then we have a discussion, sometimes a very lively, lengthy discussion, where the other commissioners are asking the investigating commissioners very specific, sometimes questions about what arose. And once the discussion is complete, the commission votes. And that commission vote then is conveyed to the governor with the written report drafted by your investigators that you met. Once the meeting is concluded, the reports get to the governor pretty quickly. We're pretty timely because by then we're already into our next cycle of investigations. So we get to him pretty quickly. As a candidate, once you've had your interview with Jenny, you will not hear from Jenny or the state bar or your investigators ever again unless you are found to be not qualified by the commission. In the event you are found to be not qualified by the commission, then you will receive a letter from the state bar informing you of that decision. And then it'll also include some appellate rights and give you options for what to do from that point forward. If you are applying for the Superior Court, you will never know, even if you're appointed, what your rating was, unless you were not qualified. The governor can appoint a not qualified candidate, but he doesn't normally do that. So all of his appointments have been something other than that, at least the trial court. Well, I think all. And so they don't know. They don't know their rating, and you never will know your rating. It's a little different for the appellate courts because there is a public hearing to confirm Court of Appeal and Supreme Court nominees. And at that public hearing, their rating is made public. So Court of Appeal and Supreme Court candidates do know what their ratings were. Our two most recent Supreme Court appointees, Justice Kruger and Justice Cuellar, were both rated exceptionally well qualified. So I guess before I go on, let me just give you a little bit of insight for a moment on these ratings. Different commissioners, when we become a commissioner, we have to find our own sort of ground of where we're going to fall within this rating system. Some of us are harder graders, some of us are easier graders, but it all works out because most of us are consistent in the way that we sort of rate. And so obviously the governor likes appointing exceptionally well qualified and well qualified candidates, but he also appoints qualified candidates. But as a candidate going through, the question might be, okay, how do I get to what we call the EWQ? How do I get there? What kind of person does that look like? And it's not really that easy to define. It's sort of a sliding scale in a lot of different areas. But I can tell you this, most of our discussion usually comes down to between well qualified and qualified. And that there's a fine line there sometimes, not always. And that's because most people, I think, probably are qualified, unless we find something really awful in the investigation and they turn out not qualified. People who have taken the time to apply, usually have some sort of background that gets them to at least a presumptive, what I would call like a presumptive qualified person. But what gets you up higher than that? And I would say it's a number of factors. Community service in the legal community. Community service in the non-legal community. Pro bono activities. Involvement in your local bar association or some bar association that you like or resonate with. Having a list of 10 bar associations that you've been a member of is less important than 2 bar associations that maybe you've served on a committee or perhaps even served as an officer. So find something you like and make an extra effort besides just paying your dues every year. Teaching is excellent. Writing is excellent. Writing articles or maybe developing an MCLE curriculum somewhere along the line. Obviously, we take into account the feedback that we receive from raters about your abilities. So I'm assuming your abilities are stellar. But I think what we look for is someone who is very well-rounded in life and as well as in your profession. So a lot of times we see people who are involved in their children's activities at school, or maybe sports activities, something like that. That's good. None of this is required. I'm just trying to give you a flavor of some of the things that we see that people have done, or maybe very involved in charity. Maybe you started a foundation and are doing something with that. Maybe you play an instrument and you're in a band on the weekends, or, you know, it could be anything, but just show us that you're better at and more interested in something other than just writing a brief all day. You know, because we assume you can do that. Okay, so just last year, the governor appointed 67 judges, and Jenny evaluated 165. So that was a year's worth of work. That was 6 months, or pardon me, 6 meetings over that year's time. So you can see that I don't know what the total number of applications were to the governor, because we don't have that data, but we do have the data of what we got, and then based on that, what he did. So as you can see, only 12 of those were, out of the 165 were in Hughes, and he chose not to appoint any of those. But you can see exactly where it broke down here. 11 with an EWQ, but 21 of those, he had 21 EWQs to choose from. He appointed 11. He had 68 WQs to choose from, and he appointed 37. 64 Qs, and he appointed 19. So you can see that even percentage-wise, he's really hoping, I think, to appoint more WQs and EWQs than Qs, which is why I wanted to give you some idea of how you might be able to boost yourself up into that higher level rating. The last 2 slides are just for your information. I will say about the rules, however, I have the website address for the Jenny rules. If you do make it, if the governor does send your application to us, you will get a copy of the Jenny rules when you're contacted by your investigator. But I would highly recommend reading the Jenny rules even before you submit your application, just so that you know sort of what's coming. And you know, they give you a little bit of a roadmap of how we operate. The NQ, I would just say one more thing about the NQs, and that is if the governor, or pardon me, if Jenny finds you to be not qualified, you have an appellate right, and there's something called Review Jenny. We refer to it as our Jenny. It's sort of like the appellate body that the state bar has in place to review what Jenny Peterson does. This is also in the rules. And they will go and look through your investigation and make a determination as to whether or not that, in their opinion, that NQ is correct and justified. Our Jenny can choose to affirm the NQ, in which case it just stays as is, or rescind. If our Jenny determines that there was a specific problem or glitch in the investigation that somehow made it unfair, then they can rescind. If they rescind the NQ rating, it's as if it never happened, technically, even though it did. And you will have the opportunity to be reinvestigated by a new set of commissioners at a later time. And then you'll start all over in the Jenny process again. That only exists with the NQ rating. So once Jenny is finished with its evaluation and we send our report to the governor, we don't have any further, it's sort of like at the front end. At the back end of the process, we don't have any further input or influence over the governor as to who he appoints. So he does as he wishes. As Judge Becton said, I work in the Orange County Superior Court, and we have 2 judges that were recently appointed. One of them had gone through Jenny 3 years before. And she had no idea it was coming, the appointment was coming. She had no idea. I spoke to her about it, and she said, she had gone on. She said we moved on in her life and had forgotten that she ever applied and opened her own law firm and was, chugging along. And she said she got a call from Mr. Groban at about 8:45 in the morning, but she didn't recognize the area code. So she let it go to voicemail, and she was working on an MSJ, and she didn't pick up her voicemail until about 4:30 that day. Finally called him back and was informed that, well, I guess she didn't have to do any more work on it. She said it, not only was it 3 years, I waited, 7 hours to call him back or something. She couldn't have been more shocked. However, there are others that, the ink is barely dry, and I pick up the newspaper and see that the governor appointed somebody that I just, met a week ago almost. So I have no idea how or why that happens, but I think you need to be prepared for a waiting game.
Anita?
Yeah, we're going to hear from, thank you so much.
Sure.
We're going to hear from, very informative. We're going to hear from Judge Santos, and then we will have questions from all of you.
All right.
Take it away.
I'm going to stand up just because I'm a little bit ADD or something of that sort. I haven't learned how to sit down yet. I don't have anything prepared. I was just listening. First of all, thank you for having me. I felt very honored to be part of this panel. I don't feel worthy sitting next to my colleagues here. But I just wanted to say, obviously, I was very recently in the process. And I have two takes on the process. On one hand, I can connect with the 3-year story because I can have a 7-year story and I can have a 6-month story. And so I'm going to give you the very, brevity is a beautiful thing, so that's my life motto. I'm going to give you cliff notes of my story and just to inspire you to apply. But I applied in 2008 and I didn't get to Jenny. So that's the 7-year version of this story. Went on with my life and then I reapplied, got the job as a commissioner. Thank goodness Governor Schwarzenegger didn't take any interest, but Governor Brown did. And I was one of the commissioners that have now been appointed. And all I can say is that I had the utmost respect for the process. My handlers were wonderful, supportive. I mean, and it's so true. You don't know them before, not even so much as a congratulations afterwards, which was fine. But the process was professional and it was succinct. And the only message I want to pass on to you is that, I think timing is everything. Governor Brown's appointment secretary, Josh Groban, was the most difficult to read. You'll get so much advice. All I can say is tenacity. I want to tell a little bit of Judge Cope's story because he was one of those 2 years. 2 years before he was appointed. And everything in between he experienced. Everything that you could imagine to my second story, not the 6-month version, was a 6-month version, but that was post-commissioner. And tenacity. It was tenacity with Judge Cope's experience. He calls, he wrote, he had more letters than they could handle. He had more support. He sent supplemental information. And so that's the 2-year version versus the 6-month version. No letters. It's just spinning. But I compliment the process. And from, as a person with a family and, as you mentioned, 4 kids, when I got stumped with all the self-doubt that many of you might have, and when I was asked about all my service, I had to go back years because I stopped after a kid 2 or 3, I don't remember which one. And so I'm writing down things that I didn't think were important, like kids' activities, leadership, and things of that sort. But I totally support and can echo what Kimberly has told you about other things around Pearson, things I didn't think. I had several people review my application, and I had left out so much on drafts 1, 2, 3, and 4 because I didn't think the governor would be interested in your personal story, and the governor is absolutely interested in your personal story. It is the personal story that is as important as your professional story. And I think from my perspective, that was the thing that took you over. It's when you have
that background. You've traveled, you've been in different cultures, you speak multiple languages, you have even your parents' story, even your children's story, because I have 2 of my 4 adults, and they have a little bit of a story already. All that adds to what you bring. And so that's all I wanted to pass on to you as a very recent appointee, is don't leave anything out. And I thank God for the people that kept saying, oh, you didn't tell them about this, you didn't tell them about that, you didn't tell them about this, but I was going to self-select and self-eliminate, in my hindsight opinion, important information. And then the bar associations, I just want to echo that. Just being active in Contra Costa County, I actually went to the neighboring county, Solano, but stayed active with Contra Costa County because this was the home that I had as a litigant and now as a jurist. And that's one thing I would totally encourage you. Our bar association here has a plug. It was something that was on my resume of things to consider in my application. So I don't know that I have, little things. I did a lot of recruiting, a lot of mentoring, nothing to do with bar associations. That's the kind of attribute, I think, that helps everybody. And I know many of you are doing that, so don't leave those types of things out of your application. So, and then I can only say tenacity, reapply, refine, and support. And these programs are excellent for that, so take advantage of
I got
yes,
one thing to add, just
absolutely.
because I know you keep hearing people talk about this workshop that's coming up. And I don't know of any other county that does this. There may be one out there, but on my watch, there has not been a request for anything like that, other than from you, Judge Becton. So I cannot tell you. You can imagine, people that know me ask me questions all the time about what should my application, this, that, what should it say, what if my mom was incarcerated, should I put that down? I get so many random questions. The fact that you are going to be able to sit down with actual Jimmy commissioners who've already served their term, they can't be influenced and you can't influence them because they're off the commission, but they have 3 years of experience. By the time you finish 3 years of experience, you have read hundreds and hundreds of applications. You have tracked who has been appointed and who hasn't. You can totally connect the dots. You have to take advantage of this. It is absolutely invaluable. No one else in the state is getting it.
And I will say, I echo that, because although there are a lot of programs around that will give you information similar to what you're getting tonight, I think Co-op is the only organization that is taking us to step B and providing the actual, it's called a mentoring workshop. And in fact, we just finished one in Alameda County about 2 weeks ago, I think it was. And last week, okay, I lose track. But I must say that I was so impressed at the caliber of the former Jimmy commissioners that volunteered their time, I must say. Ms. Knill is here with us tonight. Volunteered their time to be available to people like you. And not only did they volunteer their time, they were given private rooms, and so that and they have your applications ahead of time. So that they've actually had a chance to look at them and think about them and consider them before they ever meet you. And then they have the one-on-one time with you for about 20 minutes to actually talk with you about your application and give you pointers. And it is a conversation that takes place between the 2 of you, and none of us are privy to the conversation at all. It's invaluable for the process that you're going through. So when we come back in February, for those of you who are far enough along in the process, please take advantage of it, because it is really a unique opportunity. When we ask the questions, there's going to be two things. We also invite Josh Groban to come to this event as well, and when his schedule allows, he is present. And he had a conflict and couldn't be with us tonight. But having heard his presentation on many occasions, Judge Downey was actually going to give us some of the important tips that he would provide if he were here. And then after that, Robin Pearson is going to lift up the judicial mentoring program that we have here in Contra Costa County that is another valuable resource for you.
All right, so as Judge Becton mentioned, Josh Groban does this, and so we've done this for a couple of years. So here are his top tips. I've already told you that the governor hasn't appointed anybody. He's very proud of it with a typo. Also, Judge Santos indicated that you could apply in more than one county. If you live in a county and practice in a county and you're from an area, for instance, Merced, and you practice in Merced, you practice here, maybe you practice in Alameda and San Francisco as well, you can apply to all those counties, as long as you have a practice area that you can show and support. In terms of letters, a few good letters, I think somebody else mentioned this, is better than 15 letters from bar associations and all you ever do is play dues. They don't know anything about you other than you play dues. And the other thing is, they need to, it helps your letter if they talk about whether or not they have a process. Mr. Groban is familiar with most of the bar associations, and so he often, the governor will also, one of the things that we did mention, when the governor is looking at appointing you in a county, he contacts the local bar association, such as Los Angeles County Bar Association, and he asks them to evaluate you at the same time it's going to Jenny, because he wants to know what the local community does. But if you have a letter or two from your bar association who can talk about their process that they've called, they've vetted, they sent out forms, this is what we've heard, it's a lot better than if they just send a letter that you're a member and you've been a member for 10 years and that's all they're really saying. If your letter hasn't, you've applied and 3 years later, 4 years later, you haven't heard anything. When I was appointed, there was a judge who had applied and gone through the process 4 years before. She had completely moved on and wasn't thinking about the appointment. So she was really surprised when she got the governor's call, because she said 4 years ago, I figured it was never going to happen. So if 4 years have gone by and you haven't heard anything, you could send an updated letter, but your updated letter needs to include new stuff. So, for instance, if you were working for a firm at the time you applied, and you're now in private practice, or you're now a commissioner, or you now, have the class action suit that changed how we Google, then by all means send a letter just letting him know that there's some changes and you just want to update him on what's going on, and keep in mind that every judicial officer that gets appointed, every judge that gets appointed has to run for their seat within 2 years. So the governor, when he makes an appointment, he is going to keep in mind that you have to run in 2 years in your seat. So if it's a questionable appointment, or if it's one he's not sure about, he might wait. He also says that sometimes happens with respect to minority candidates, because you may be the first, or you may be the first, and he doesn't want to put you in a position unless he's certain it's going to be a comfortable spot of putting you as the first in a county, and you have to run for a re-election, and you don't have a progressive community that's going to be appointing. He doesn't want his appointments to be unelected. So he keeps that in mind when he makes appointments, not just for diverse candidates, but for all those that he does. And then I think that's it of his, Mr. Groban's big picks. And with that, I will turn it over to Ms. Pearson.
I'll be very brief. On the table back there, I hope you all picked up the judicial mentoring program form for our county bar. This was initially started in 2008, when actually I was president of the Bar Association, working very closely with Judge Becton. It's a fantastic program right here in this county. We have a lot of judges who are eager to participate and mentor you one-on-one. We had a number of people go through it, and we have reinstituted it, so it's bigger and better than ever. And I think you get, also through that program, really great feedback. You get judges who will take the time, sit with you, review your application, give you pointers and tips as well. Judge Becton is working on that with Judge Johnson now, so I'm not sure who the judges will be that are going to participate, but it's an excellent program. Please pick up this, fill it out, and send it in as quickly as possible, because we'd like to get this rolling out in early 2016. The other thing is, I want to thank all the members of the Diversity Committee that are here today, who were really helpful in putting this program together. They're in the back, but if you could please raise your hand and be acknowledged, because they worked very hard to put this all together. And the barristers as well. So with that.
Thank you, thank you. And then I do have to, you are going to get to ask questions, I promise. But I do have to say thank you as well to our sponsors. So in addition to the ones that were mentioned by Robin Pearson, we want to thank very much the Bar Association for partnering with us, as well as the National Association of Women Judges for partnering with us to put on this event, providing the space and the food, and the State Bar, of course, Council of Access and Fairness, putting together the packets that you have. We are so grateful to everyone that had a hand. So now, we promise, questions. Right.
Do we know how many seats are open for appointments, or how many are going to be open seats?
Yes,
Yes.
it depends on the county. I mean, I don't know for your county. Do you know? For instance, LA has 20 vacancies,
Whoa.
and they always have about 15 to 20 vacancies. And they have two vacancies on the horizon, because there are two judges who said they're not running for re-election. So we know that there are two other spots. And here,
I'm trying to remember.
I think there's one.
I think there's one vacancy
You
in
got one here.
Contra Costa County. Right.
If you look on the California Supreme Court website, there's actually a link, and it's updated every month. And you can click on that link, and it'll tell you all the open judgeships throughout the state.
wow, we learned something.
Hey, that's great.
Supreme Court.
Oh, Spring
Does it
Court.
also include the benefits and pay package?
I think the benefits and pay package is the same throughout the state. It's about 182,000.
No, it's 190, it's 190 something.
Oh,
189
Okay.
with the muscle.
okay.
And then there's some little perks. you
Again,
get.
because of what I do, every now and again we get attorneys who call about the application process. And so one of the questions that we get is with regard, and I think you kind of answered it, with regard to, you have a juvenile record, which juvenile records are different from adult records, and that they're often sealed and they're not necessarily treated as the same. So do you go with the report everything approach, or do you go with the actual adjudication and the way that works?
Of the candidate?
Yeah, the candidate. Let's say the candidate has a juvenile record, nothing major, just has a juvenile record. Not an adult record. And since it's treated differently, since, most of them are sealed, the whole process is different. Does that have to be reported on your application?
It doesn't, I don't think it has to be, but I think you do yourself a better service by disclosing it. As you mentioned, they're supposed to be sealed, but for instance, if they were an adult committing a crime, the prosecutors are able to open those sealed records. And so I think you do a better job to say, you know what, I had some problems when I was a teenager, but I spent some time somewhere, I had a change of life experience, and since the time I've turned 17, I haven't had a problem. I think, one, it's a compelling story, and two, you ensure that they don't find something that you haven't told them.
And will they find it through moral character? Because I know moral character, you have to report juvenile arrest.
No,
Usually open
they
it
could,
up.
they could find it. I think you need to tell it on your application, because everything that goes to Jenny is confidential. So you tell it, you explain it, and you move on, as opposed to you don't tell it, you assume it's been sealed, they find it, and then the governor, and then someone's gonna think that you're kind of hiding the ball.
Yeah, absolutely.
Finding it isn't just like a conviction, it's talking to those who talk to those who talk to those. It's the, can you tell me someone who might have something not positive to say, question, that ends up yielding that kind of information. And that was her opening advice, it's better to disclose it than have them find it.
And when you do your application, when you see Jenny, when you do your application, you have those 5 people on the back that you're supposed to recommendation, and then when you get to Jenny, they ask you for more. Make sure that you've told them you're on their application. Make sure that they're supportive. Make sure that they're not surprised when Jenny calls them and says, "Hi, you're on their application," and, you know, it sounds funny to Jenny when they're surprised by the process. And they're supposed to be your 5 biggest supporters.
It also sounds funny to Jenny when someone on your personal reference list gives you an NQ. We noticed that. We understand if someone on your, what we call the PDQ list, personal data questionnaire list, that's the list of all the opposing counsel and judges and supervisors and various people you've come in contact with in your legal career are on your application. We understand if one of those gives you an NQ, especially let's say you're a civil litigator and you know, get into some heated stuff. I expect someone somewhere is going to have an opinion that maybe you wouldn't be the best judicial officer. We get that quite frequently. But when someone on your personal list, then there's a disconnect. Then we wonder why, of all things, there's a disconnect there.
I come from Merced, and over there I wish we had such talent and such informative sessions. I don't think we.
We'll come.
We'll come anywhere.
We just need someone to partner with us to
Find
help
the
with the
space
logistics and getting the word out in your community, but we will come.
Okay, I'll talk to the president of the
Yeah.
local bar association.
Yeah.
Well, I have like 2 questions that kind of combine. One is that at least in Merced, we're hearing that if you don't make it to the vetting committee, which I still don't know what it is. and
That's
it's
the
still like-
secret
Secret
committee.
committee.
Okay, that you never even get to the Jenny. Is that true?
That's true. And that's one of the problems with the secret committee, because you can get cut off and you haven't a clue who cut you off. Because they're secret and they don't answer to anybody other than the governor.
The secret committee gets the name from the governor's office and they make telephone calls and they ask questions about you. I'm told, although it's secret so we don't know for sure, but I'm told that if you get 2 negative from those calls, that it's unlikely that you will move from the governor's office to the Jenny Commission. So you do need to get through that committee first.
Okay. And the second part, I guess my question is, like I said, we are in the dark over there. We have no idea. And I'm talking about prosecutors and all kinds of people that I've spoken to. For example, the person was saying, well, I mean, does the investigation include my credit cards and where I spent money?
They run your, not where you spend money unless you do something really ridiculous, but if you file bankruptcy and they run your credit report. They do. The governor's office runs your credit report because if you have if you have an issue, they want to know it, and they don't, as Ms. Knill said, they don't want to be embarrassed.
Okay.
So they need to know everything that's going on. So they do run your credit report.
Foreclosures also?
Yeah.
Yeah, they'll know that, and you will be disclosing that anyway.
Okay.
You will be
We would
disclosing
hope.
foreclosures, and after tonight, you will be disclosing this. Bankruptcies, yes. Malpractice actions, yes. Yes to all. Disclose, 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 and then explain. And the governor can get over just about any hurdle. As I've heard Josh Groban say, he went to seminary. He's a very forgiving person.
Yes.
What about identity theft?
Then you just explain that yeah.
If you have a common name now, you run like Checkmate, those things are totally fallacious. It's terrible.
I think what we've been trying to say is that it's better to whatever the problem is, disclose it and then provide the explanation as opposed to being silent about it. That's the better practice, is to disclose. Way in the back.
Do you suggest asking the local bar association to do a review of you on your own before Jenny Commission asks for it?
Yeah. Many organizations actually have vetting processes that you might consider going through. The local bar association is one. Also, they very often get your name from the governor's office if the governor wants to have that information. And some bar associations have very formal processes, like I can think, say, for example, the California Women Lawyers, there is a process that you go through submitting even your PDQ directly to them, and they actually contact your references and so forth. So it is a very, very thorough vetting process. Same thing with some, for example, with Cable, California Association of Fact Lawyers and Judges, we have a formal process that you would go through submitting your application, and you can expect that your references would be contacted, and also others who might be on your application. So it doesn't hurt at all, but as Judge Downing was mentioning, you don't want to have so many letters and recommendations coming in that it's overwhelming. But a few well-chosen ones should be helpful.
In this county, Contra Costa County Bar Association has a very formal process as well. In fact, they contacted me before I knew I was even in Jenny. That's how I knew. They
So
were
the
on
governor
it
must-
so quick.
The governor must have contacted them because they contact the local bars associations that they use at the same time they send it to Jenny. So when you can tell when you're in Jenny because you may hear from your local bar association before you hear from Jenny, or you hear from them within weeks of one another. I think the young lady in the red had a
Yes.
question.
Hi. I had a question about what you were saying, Judge Downing, about there was something where you had to run after a couple years of being appointed. Can you
Yes.
explain that a little bit more?
Yes, every judge who's appointed has to run for re-election in their seat within 2 years of their election. So I had to run for re-election I got appointed in August, and I had to run a year and a half later in the next cycle. So you're going to have to run once you're appointed, and so the concern is there are times that it might be a conservative county, and the judge and the governor wants to make some appointments, but he has to keep in mind that once he appoints you, you're going to have to run for re-election. So he doesn't want to put you in a hostile spot where there may be some concern you couldn't get re-elected. Or his appointment might be too radical for the area. But every judge who gets appointed has to run re-election within 2 years.
Does that mean you have to pay for
Yes, you
campaign
do.
promotions and that?
Well, you don't have to do that part. It depends on what goes on in your county. But you do have to run for election. You do have to pay the fees. And the kick of it all is, for instance, I think in LA County it's like $2,000. It's not considered a business expense or something that I can take off my taxes. But it's to keep my job, but they didn't ask me. But yeah, you have to pay all those fees. And then, it depends on your county. Sometimes you have to run, and sometimes you just have to run, but you actually don't have any competition, and so your name won't show up. If you have no competition, your name doesn't show up on the ballot.
We might be assuming something as well. So there are two different things here, because one is that you have to be on the ballot within 2 years of your appointment. But then after that, every 6 years, you still have to stand for re-election.
Right, we're just talking about when you're first appointed, you have to run in 2 years.
But after that, every 6 years, you still have to run. And you can be challenged.
I have a question for Ms. Knill. So I've kind of heard this urban legend that the Jenny Commission is, staffed with plaintiff lawyers. Is that true, not true? And if it's not true, how does one, qualify for the Jenny Commission?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that because in some ways, let me answer by saying the same thing with regard to the candidates. Jenny can only evaluate who the governor sends us, and the governor can only send us who applies. So to the extent we're going to make any changes in the diversity of the bench, we have to get a more diverse applicant pool. And it's sort of the same way with the commission. So that when people apply to be on the commission, there have been years when the applications haven't been diverse enough, or there haven't been enough of them, and the State Bar has done a major push and extended the time within which to apply to be on the Jenny Commission to expand that pool, because there just wasn't enough there to begin with. So Board of Trustees looks at every single applicant and how they are going to fit into the commission as a whole. They look at practice area, they look at ethnicity, they look at length of time at the bar, whether you're an attorney, whether you're not. And they also look at the different, up and down the state, so that it has to be evenly distributed around the state. So we have commissioners from all over the state. It's not stacked in Northern or Southern California at all. It's spread out. And so it's almost like a matrix that they have to get right every year. So no, it's not staffed with plaintiffs' lawyers.
And you mentioned the meetings in LA, so are people funding that at their own expense? They need to get themselves down to LA for those meetings?
The meetings alternate LA and San Francisco, and the state bar pays all of our expenses. But, yeah.
Thank you.
Well, if you were applying, say, for example, in Contra Costa County, you would not likely have your interview in LA. You would more likely have your interview in San Francisco.
Oh, no, I was speaking about the members of the
Oh, the
commission
members
who
themselves.
meet
Oh, I thought you were talking about the
multiple times a
judicial
year, half in Northern
I'm sorry.
California, and
Yeah,
half
they
in
do,
LA.
because those are where
Yeah,
the two state bar offices are. There's an office in LA, there's an office in San Francisco. So if you're not thinking about applying for the bench in the next couple of years, you should really consider applying for Jenny. If you sit on Jenny, I think it's 2 years you have to wait.
Yes.
It's 2 years you have to wait before you can apply to the bench. But if you're not planning to apply anytime soon, the Jenny service would be invaluable to you because you will have seen it from the inside. But the other thing is, it's important that the commissioners that are looking at the applications are diverse as well. So you should really think about it.
Absolutely, and I can't tell you how often we reach out to other commissioners on if we don't know some specific thing about a candidate. For example, I do civil law. If I'm paired with another commissioner that does civil law and we're evaluating a criminal attorney, I had this happen recently, and something came up in an investigation, and I had no idea whether what the raters were telling me was, legitimate from a criminal practitioner standpoint or not. And I called the DA and I called the PD on the commission and got their input on both of them. So we use each other's, diverse, at least practice areas to our advantage.
All the way to that summer?
Is there a requisite number of years you have to be practicing to apply to the Jenny Commission?
No, but I have to say most of us are probably a little bit more experienced. Maybe the youngest has been practicing 7, 8 years. Some are retired, then lots of times.
Jenny's a lot of work.
Yes, it is.